Welcome back to Hardball. The most consequential decision the incoming president will have to make in the coming days is who will be Secretary of State. Among the names being discussed, the former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, John Bolton, who has called for bombing Iran. That's right. Senator Bob Corker of Tennessee, the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, who said today he's in the mix for the job. And then there's former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani, reportedly the front runner. Giuliani's making it clear he'd like the job.
Now you're being considered for important jobs. The one I hear most often is Secretary of State. Have you had any conversations with him?
I have.
And
they're between him and me. Since I left mayor, this is a rough estimate, I've been in 80 countries, 150 different foreign trips. I've been all over the world.
I know you've got very close friends in Israel.
Honorary knighthood.
Yeah, I heard about that.
From Great Britain.
Yeah.
Prime Minister Netanyahu has been my personal friend for 25 years. I never go to Israel without spending 2 hours with Bibi, and I feel I can call him that. And I know the world.
Well, Giuliani or Bolton might face opposition from those who thought the Iraq war was a disaster. Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky said he would likely oppose either of those two gentlemen, and he's joining us right now. It's great to have you on, Senator Rand Paul. I was one of those who thought you'd win this whole thing, and I was wrong. I thought the country was ready for a little bit off. I thought the country's ready for a little freedom from big government in the right way. One thing that Donald Trump campaigned on was that he thought the Iraq war was stupid wars. He used the phrase a lot. He didn't like regime change. He tackled Hillary Clinton again and again for taking us into country after country, supporting each war one after another, Iraq, Libya, Syria. And now we hear he's talking about naming John Bolton, Mr. Neocon Hawk, as his Secretary of State. How's that sit with you?
Well, you know, one of the reasons I endorsed Donald Trump was that I liked the fact that he saw the Iraq war as a mistake. He thought that regime change was a mistake, and the unintended consequences of regime change were basically that the world was less safe and that our national security was more endangered by regime change. So I liked that about Donald Trump's campaign, and one of the reasons I endorsed him. So I want a Secretary of State that actually understands and has learned from the lessons of the Middle East. And I guess I worry that people like John Bolton and really, frankly, Mayor Giuliani, they have, I would call them unrepentant advocates for the Iraq war. They don't seem to have learned anything from the Iraq war. They still defend it, and both have advocated a bomb first, sort of ask questions later for Iran. And I don't think you really want your chief diplomat to be an advocate for war. You know, that would be better if we're going to have a Secretary of War. They might be good for that position. But I want someone who's reasonable. I want somebody who's a realist, that sees the world as it is. That person may not always agree with me, but I want someone who's an even keel, who thinks about things like that. And frankly, I think Bob Corker would be a much better choice.
Why do you think the neocons think that these wars, one after another, have been helpful to Israel? I accept the fact they may be pro-Israeli. Most Americans are. But we were better off in this country, and Israel was certainly better off, having a bunch of these sort of half put together countries, let's put it like that, like the Ba'athist country of Saddam Hussein in Iraq, or Gaddafi. They were kind of clownish leaders. They weren't strategically or existentially dangerous to Israel. Israel could contend with them with its arms behind its back. It could always deal with. Now we got the Islamic State, you know, ISIS, we got the whole thing coming apart. And Israel's much more endangered with Iran, with no buffer between Israel and Iran. Why do people who say they're for Israel, and may be for Israel, put Israel in such a vulnerable state like it's in now compared to where it was? That's my thinking.
I think one of the things is that people fail to understand that Israel's a very pluralistic nation. They have a variety of opinions. If you go over there, they have heated debate. They're a real democracy. And there have been many people. Dagon, who was a former head of the Mossad, came out and had a much different opinion than the ruling government. So they're a very pluralistic country. But I think even many in Israel would say that, you know, losing Gaddafi and having the rise of ISIS in Libya probably doesn't make Israel safer. I don't think it makes the United States safer. In fact, I feel more at risk for terrorists organizing in Libya now with Gaddafi gone. Doesn't mean I was an advocate of Gaddafi or Mubarak or any of these people. And yet you have to look at what comes after if you decide that your worldview is to displace these people. I think we should always try to determine what's in our best national interest or vital interest. We shouldn't think, oh, you know what, we're going to make the world a perfect democracy and we're going to topple Assad. What comes after Assad is a very important question. and what comes after the government in Iran, or what comes next if we bomb Iran. So I think we need a more reasonable sort of person and not a bomb thrower to be head of it. But also, I support Donald Trump. I want Donald Trump to pick someone who supports Donald Trump's vision on foreign policy, that understands that the Iraq War was a mistake and that regime change hasn't always been to our benefit.
Are you ready to filibuster this? These are the nominees. Either one's the nominee.
I feel pretty strongly about it, and I will tell you something I haven't told anybody else. I've had some conversation with some other Republican senators, and I'm not the only one with some misgivings over both Giuliani and Bolton. And I haven't met a Democrat that's for either one of them, but I've met several Republicans that aren't. We have a 52-48 majority. All it would take with 2 or 3 Republicans to say that they can't go along with Giuliani and can't go along with Bolton, that I think you'd find there are some that I think would sail through. Frankly, I think Senator Corker would go through. I probably met 15 Democrats in the last 2 days that said they would vote for his confirmation, but they are very, very worried about Bolton, very, very worried about Giuliani.
Can you defeat him in an up or down? Can you hold him to less than 50 votes?
It means you'd have to have 2 or 3 Republicans. And like I say, I'm one. And I think there are 2 or 3 other that I met with today that I would say that the best way to describe them is profound misgivings about either Bolton or Giuliani. You know, if Giuliani is a great friend of the president-elect, maybe there could be another position in the cabinet that weren't putting him in a place where he's at odds with the president's vision on foreign policy.
Thank you so much, Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky. Thank you. He's just been reelected. Thank you. The Washington Post today reported on how big a change a Trump presidency could mean to one of the most unstable regions in the world. According to the Washington Post, the Middle East is bracing for an incoming American president who seems intent on radically reordering the regional balance of power over there. Trump will seek to bring about a significant recalibration of the existing order in the Middle East in favor of Russia, away from Shiite Iran, and to the benefit of the Sunni Gulf states and Turkey. Well, during the campaign, Donald Trump outlined a foreign policy radically different, as we said, from what most Democrats and Republicans have advocated. Let's watch him.
If Putin wants to go and knock the hell out of ISIS, I am all for it 100%, and I can't understand how anybody would be against it. I've been looking at the different players, and I've been watching Assad, and I've been pretty good at this stuff over the years because deals are people. And I'm looking at Assad and saying, maybe he's better than the kind of people that we're supposed to be backing. Now it's such a mess over there with everybody involved. And the airspace is very limited. You know, it's not that big an area. The airspace is very limited. So now you have, what are we going to start, World War III over Syria?
Joining me right now, Senator Bob Corker of Tennessee, chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, and a possible pick to be the next Secretary of State. Senator, what do you make of what you've been hearing there about Trump and what he said? He was opposed to the Iraq War. He supports the idea of Russia being our partner in dealing with the Syrian situation. He opposes the nuclear deal with Iran. Are you in conformance with those various positions?
Well, I mean, Syria has really 2 efforts underway, as I know you know well, and one is the effort against ISIS, but there's a whole other conflict that's underway, and that's the civil war that's taking place between, quote, moderate Syrians, Kurds, and others against the Assad regime. So you really have 2 efforts underway. So, yes, I think we could, in fact, coordinate with Russia as it relates to ISIS, but we're on different sides as it relates to the civil war that's taking place within the country. And so it's much more complicated than just for me to be able to just answer in a pat way, as you well know. And the territory now has gotten very interwoven and overlapped, and even if we deal with ISIS, if we exterminate ISIS, we still have this raging civil war, which is really the piece that's creating so much devastation to the population there. And you can't really solve that by just dealing with the ISIS piece.
Well, how do we get out of there? Because most Americans, and they're generally pro-Israeli, we know we need the oil still, despite all this transition to a post-fossil fuel era, if it ever comes. But definitely would like to stay out of all this complexity. We don't know Sunni versus Shia. How do you do what Joe Biden says, just create a whole new partition where you give the Shia land, the Sunni land, the Kurds their land, separate them all and hope, like the Brits did in South Asia with the Indians and the Pakistanis, hope that you can just keep them apart from each other. Should that be what we're doing? What is our goal down the road, next 10 years? What are we doing over there?
Well, it could be in Syria, and obviously I think you're mentioning two different countries there purposely.
Well, I consider both of them,
Yeah, Yeah. So in Syria, I mean, there really has been a concentration of the regime only in one area on the eastern part of the country, and it's possible that over time that is an area that is partitioned. Obviously, the Kurds would love to see that happen. In Iraq, and I've met and been in Erbil and met in various places around the world with the Kurdish leadership, and I know that over time, Chris, they would like for that to happen. They'd like for it to be partitioned, but we put so much effort, now I'm talking about Iraq now,
yes.
We put so much effort into having a unified country. I do think that obviously Kurds over time are going to have greater autonomy, but right now the country should stay as a whole. I think as they're trying to rout out ISIS to try to then take on at the same time partitioning off, it's a very different situation in Iraq because you actually have a military and a government that mostly is in control of the country. So the two situations are very, very different.
Can you imagine yourself being Secretary of State with President Trump as president? Can you imagine that?
You know, I have to say, President-elect Trump is demonstrating something that I think could create a good environment for a Secretary of State, and that is people are uncertain about what our position is going to be in the world, and it would give, in fact, someone who had the environment. I mean, they'd have to have the freedom to be able to do this and the direct line to the president or his representative to ensure that you're always in sync. But there is a chance here to really pave a way into a new era. And so I think for people who've shown interest in it or been part of the mix, I think that's the piece that is enticing. And as you mentioned, I mean, we've had entanglements there for many years. We've made a lot of mistakes since about 2001. And to have the opportunity to really develop a little different course of action, I think would be intriguing people who care deeply about our foreign policy.
I think it's the greatest job in the world. Morally, intellectually, politically, it's the greatest job in the world to be able to represent our country in the world. Thank you very much, Senator Bob Corker of Tennessee.
Thank you so much.
Up next, can the Democratic Party win back the white working-class voters who abandoned the party for Donald Trump? Joe Biden says the party doesn't talk to those people anymore.